Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, host and head bookologist here at the Get Literate podcast. I'm a book loving, notebook hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. On this podcast, we explore the power of bookology. What's that? That's the study of books and reading and notebooks and writing mixed with mindful practices and creativity to create lives we love. Here, you'll find episodes exploring the reading and writing life and how they can make our actual lives better. You'll get book recommendations and notebooking prompts around particular themes, and you'll even hear from authors and special guests who can fuel our reading and writing hearts and help us take inspired action in our own daily practices. So, grab a notebook and your TBR list, and let's get literate. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Get Literate podcast. I'm Stephanie, your podcast host, your favorite bookologist, and the person who's here week after week reminding you of the power of reading and writing to make life better. I want to start today's episode with a question. What is your favorite thing to do while you read? Think about that for a second. What's your favorite thing to do while you read? Is it to sip your favorite cup of coffee? Is it to enjoy the breeze as you read outside? Is it to put on your favorite ASMR room or the special music in the background that makes you feel relaxed? What's your favorite thing to do while you read? Besides the reading, of course. For me, it's collecting quotes. Ever since I was a little girl, I have loved collections. Collections of anything. Collections of books, of course, but collections of shoes, of all the mementos I kept in a shoebox to hang on to. Now I'm a collector of clothing, and I have bins and bins and bins of my favorite clothing from my children's childhood that I swear I will put into a wonderful quilt one day that everybody doubts me for, but you watch, I will make it one day. I have collections of wine corks from almost every wine bottle ever opened in my home. I have collections of sticky notes because I love them in all shapes and sizes. But my favorite collection is my collection of quotes. Compelling, important, striking, sentimental, thought provoking quotes from the books I read. Now, I am a collector of quotes from anywhere. I love finding them on social media. I love finding them from my favorite podcasts, from my favorite mentors, and I do collect those too. But I'm really excited about the collection of quotes from the books I read because they feel so personal. I didn't just randomly find them on the internet. These books ended up in my hands for a reason, and therefore those quotes ended up in my heart for a reason. Now, I keep those quotes on sticky notes. I write them in my planner or my daily to-do lists. I even have them randomly placed throughout the house. One of my favorites that my daughter shared with me is actually taped to my closet wall above my shoe shelf so that every time I go to pick a new pair of shoes, I'm reminded of that quote. There is such power in collecting quotations. And there is a particular power in lifting the lines we love from the literature that we are reading. Now, why is that? Let's start the episode there. Why should I look for quotes I love in the books I'm reading? Why should I take the time to read them, reread them, savor them, note them, write them down? Why does it matter? Well, overall, reading with a purpose of finding a nugget that speaks to you in the form of a mic drop quote, well, it just enriches the reading experience. When we read with an open mind and an open heart, and we expect something to jump off the page that can make our life better, it usually does. And so when you read with a pen in your hand or a sticky note by your side or a quote notebook close by, chances are you're going to be paying attention to the text in a different way. You are going to look for those lines that jump out at you so that you can hang on to them and figure out why they jumped out at you and what they might mean. Reading in this way also helps you stay present in the book, right? It can be hard to find the time to read and then actually stay grounded in your reading. Your mind can wander. You can be distracted by those outside noises and things that are calling for your attention. But when you are reading and you are reading with a focused mind, it helps you stay present in the task at hand, which is getting lost in your book. It also helps you better connect to what you are reading. We might be having meaningful connections or disconnections, I would say, with the characters, with the location, with the plot line and the events and the things happening to the characters. If we are looking for those moments of clarity in those lines, then we are better connecting to the page. We know if we can better connect to the page, then we can better connect that to our own life, which is the whole purpose of what I am here trying to convince everyone to do. Now, collecting these quotes also boosts our memory of these books that we've read. Have you ever been talking with a friend and thought, oh, they need to read this book, but you can't quite recall the title or you can't quite recall the author? You can see what the cover looks like, but you can't remember the plot line inside. That used to happen to me all the time. When you read a lot of books, those storylines can get jumbled in your mind. That's why I take the time to read and review every single book I read and post that review on Goodreads. Yes, it's so other people can find the books, but it's also so that I can remember them and what I thought about them so that I can share them. Looking for, saving, collecting your favorite quotes, it helps you build memory of that book so that you're better able to call on that inspiration later and share it with someone else. It just helps you revisit books in a particular way. Now, there is a book that I love called Mindful Reading. It's actually called The Art of Mindful Reading by Ella Bertoud. And here is a quote that I loved. Learning literature by heart is a way of making the book a part of you forever, alchemizing it into something integral to you and your life. There you have it, right? Collecting these quotes and doing something with them in some way just cements the book into your soul. Right? Every book we read changes us. It changes our brain, it changes our mind, it changes our heart. It's there, whether we like it or not. And if we focus on it by lifting these lines that we love, we are just cementing that into our reading life and our actual life. So hopefully I've convinced you that looking for those mic drop moments, those quotes that jump out at you, hopefully I've convinced you that that is a good practice for your reading life. Now, I love thinking about why those quotes jump out at me, right? Every book that ends up in our hands ends up there for a reason. Every line that jumps out at us is jumping out at us for a reason. We could read the book one day and have a certain quote speak to us. We could reread that book on another day and a completely different quote speaks to us because we aren't the same person. So I love thinking about how books impact us based on who we are and where we are and what season, literally and figuratively, we are in. So, how do you do it? How do you lift lines of literature so they are cemented into your being? Well, there's a couple of ways. First, if you are someone that enjoys writing in your books and you own those books, then you could simply read with a pencil, a pen, or a highlighter in your hand. And when you come across a line you love, you simply mark it. Now, if you are on an e-reader, this is why I love my Kindle. You can highlight the text that you love and it will save it for you in a list. And then you can print out that list later if you'd like, or just go back to your notebook like I do and copy it in by hand. So that's one way. Very low maintenance. Read with a highlighter, read with a pencil, and annotate as you go, rereading, slowing down in that moment. Now, the second thing you might like to do is get out those beautiful book darts. I love book darts, those little flimsy gold or silver. They remind me of those paper fasteners that you used to put. Do you even do this anymore? I don't, but you used to push them through the 3 holes in your loose leaf paper and then fold the ends, and it would just make this little binded book. I used to make so many of them when I was little. It reminds me of that material. Very thin, flimsy, usually gold, silver, bronze colored book darts that look like a dart, kind of an arrow at the end. And when you find a quote you love, you simply go to that line on the right side of your page, or the left side, I guess I should say the margin of your page, and you fold it over the page so that the arrow is pointing to the line you want to hang on to. These look beautiful when you do these in the books that you read. If you look at the side of the book, it's just this beautiful sparkling gold and silver yumminess on the page. And when you open it up, you can instantly see the quote that you have saved. Now, those first two options are for if you own the book, you write in them, you put in book darts that will live forever in them. But what if you can't do that? What if it's a library book? If it's a book that you borrowed? Well, that's where sticky notes come in, my friend. You can have sticky notes, you can have sticky flags, you can have sticky arrows, you can have see-through transparent translucent stickies. You can get highlighting tape, things that you can do to mark the text in the moment so that you can do something with those lines before you give the book back. So they're placeholders while you're reading. You like a quote, you want to lift it out of the page, put a sticky note on it, put a flag on it, so that when you're done reading that day or you're done reading that book, you can look back at all of those moments and decide, which ones do I want to hang on to before I pay this book forward? And that's when you get out your notebook, which is what I am recommending that everyone does and everyone has. I want you to have a quote notebook. Now, if you only have one notebook, you are an all in one kind of notebooker, then I just want you to start adding quotes to your notebook. And ideally, you would have a little section that is separate. Maybe you go to the end of your notebook and you count out 10 pages and you put a sticky note on there that says quotable quotes or lines from literature, whatever you want to call it. And you start funneling those quotes there. I really do recommend keeping them separate because, as you'll find out later, I want you to go back and visit these quotes periodically. And that's easier to do if they are in a separate place in a notebook. And that's actually how I do this. When I read, I mark down those quotes I love, typically with sticky notes or with book darts. And then at the end of either my reading session, but more often than not, at the end of the book, I go ahead and take those quotes that I really, really love and I put them in my notebook. Now, why a notebook? Beyond what I just said, there's a little bit more research behind why I want you to keep an old fashioned, write those quotes by hand kind of notebook. First, we know there is so much research that says the act of writing something down cements it into our memory. And yes, this could be typed. It absolutely could be a Google Doc on your Google Drive that you just funnel all of your beautiful quotes into. But we do know that writing by hand with old-fashioned pencil or your favorite pen on old-fashioned paper, it works better. It creates strengthened connections. And so writing these quotes down by hand, just by default of doing that, cements it into your brain even more. But here's the thing that I love. When you write a quote out by hand, word for word, you are embodying that quote. You didn't just read it and move on. You're reading it and now you're literally embodying it by writing it on the page. You are doing the same thing the author did, writing word for word for word and letting it sink in. So there is something magical and powerful about doing this kind of quote collection in a notebook by hand. And that is what I am hoping that you will do. Now, I want to give you some of my favorite quotes, and there are a lot of them. I have multiple quote notebooks that I have kept over the years, and I've changed my notebooking habits around them. I used to have a small blank page sketchbook. And for every quote that I loved, I would write it in big, bold lettering and a colorful marker and note the author and the title on the page so that I could just flip through the books one by one and I could get a page of quotes that I could just enjoy. Now, I still like doing that because I love getting a little bit more creative with my quotes, but there are so many that I love that I did switch to a typical lined notebook and I write the title and the author. And then underneath that, I write a bulleted list of my favorite quotes so that now it's a little bit more compact. I don't have quite so many small, chunky notebooks rolling around, and I have bigger notebooks that hold more. So you can decide how you want to keep your notebook collection, but I have found I love my newer method because when I revisit it, I'm able to revisit so many more quotes. Okay, so let me share some of my favorites with you. And if this quote jumps out at you, if you have some sort of response, whether it's in your mind, like, ooh, that's a great quote. I got to write that down. Maybe I want to read that book. Or maybe it's in your body, right? You feel that gut punch or you get that lift of bubbly joy as you listen to it. That's another sign maybe you need this book too. So here we go. Some of my favorites. Correct what you can and bear the rest with honesty and courage. That is from Recipe for a Charmed Life by Rachel Linden, one of my favorites. Here's another one. I know you feel like no one here sees you. I'm telling you, I see you. That one was a sucker punch for me. That is from Amazing Grace Adams by Fran Littlewood. And here's another. Who knew you could be brave just by deciding to be? I love that one. That is from an early middle grade novel titled Rica Baptista, Llama, Iguana, and My Very Best Friend by Janet Costa Bates. So these quotes that jump out at you, they could come from fiction, adult fiction, children's literature. They could come from nonfiction. They could come from poetry. They could come from a magazine. They can come from anywhere. We just want to be grateful that the quote found us in the first place. Here is another one I love from the Red Address book by Sophia Lundberg, a book that we read inside my Get Literate Patreon community book club. I wish you enough. Enough sun to light your days, enough rain that you appreciate the sun, enough joy to strengthen your soul, enough pain that you can appreciate life's small moments of happiness, and enough friends that you can manage a farewell now and then. Oh, talk about a life lesson kind of quote there. I also want to highlight a couple of quotes from a new book that isn't out yet, but it will be in January and you need to pick it up. It's called Bluebird Day by Megan Tatey. And this was a beautiful book with strong themes of motherhood and mother-daughter relationships. And I loved so many of them that I have multiple pages from this quote. But here are a couple of favorites. She's a mosaic of emotions, a collage, really. sleek magazine strips embodying acceptance, roughly torn bits of anger, circles of sadness, swirls of confusion, curiosity, caution. I loved that one. Thinking about ourselves as a mosaic, as an art form. Oh, I love that. Here are a couple from Lion of the Sky by Ritu Hamnani. Friendships help the fractures of your life heal faster. Here's another one. You can't fix yourself by breaking someone else. Oh, aren't they good? Aren't they good? I want to leave you with a more light and fun quote. This one is from A Wish for Winter, which, if you know me, then you know I love Viola Shipman's books, aka Wide Rouse. And here we go. As you slide down the banister of life, may the splinters never point in the wrong direction. So you see, you can get lighthearted quotes. You can get deep quotes. You can get quotes that give you a shot of inspiration to your head or a kick in your gut to your stomach, right? Those quotes jump out at you for some reason, and we really should pay attention to them. Now, what do you do after? Well, I love periodically revisiting my quote notebook. Every time I write a new quote in there from a book that I'm reading, I always flip back through the pages and remember what those old quotes were. It just reminds me of the inspiration that I've collected. It gives me something new to think about. It reminds me of those old friends, right? Those old books that I've read, which is such a fun thing to do. But I also love that looking back at the quotes you collect over time, and that's easier to do if it's in a notebook, it gives you a glimpse of who you were and what you were going through at that point of your life. As I said, collecting quotes, it matters what stage of life you're in and what's going on. You could read that same book a couple of years apart and pick out completely different quotes. And that's okay. That's even the point, right? And so looking back at your notebook, at what quotes you've collected over time, just like if you look back to the books you've read over time, it gives us a portrait of who we were and what was important to us and what things mattered to us. And I just love revisiting that. Now, the last thing I want to share is how you can use your own quote notebook to start off a really magical reading and writing practice in the morning. I have talked on previous episodes how one of my favorite morning routines is to read a little bit of inspirational personal development nonfiction in the morning and then write from that. It helps give me focus. It helps make sure I'm focusing on the kinds of things I want to feel and bring into my day. And I love it. But it doesn't mean that that inspirational reading has to come from an outside book. Your combination of magical reading and writing could be getting out your quote notebook, flipping through it, finding one that jumps out at you, and simply writing about that. So here's how that works. Flip through your notebook, find one that jumps out at you and you think, I think that's the one I need to write about today. Here's a good one that might be good for a morning writing. This quote comes from Beth Kempton's Calm Christmas and a Happy New Year. If you find yourself complaining about something, add the words, so I can, at the end of the sentence to flip it into an opportunity. How's that for a game changer? So here's what you would do. You would take that quote, you know it jumped out at you for a reason that day. You'd turn to a fresh page in your notebook and you would write it at the top of the page. And you write the quote and the title and the author at the top of the page so that you can embody that quote, as I mentioned earlier. Then you just write. You write whatever comes to mind, trying not to pick up your pencil too often and get too much in your head, and just write about the quote. Now, if that is too hard for you, if you're not a good free writer, if you need a little structure, you might start with a sentence starter like this. I think this quote resonated with me because another sentence starter is, here's what this quote needs me to know today. And you could write from that. So we write the quote, we write our thinking, and then what I urge you to do is end with an actionable step. End with something that you could do today related to that quote to bring it to life in your actual life, right? Maybe you say, I'm ready to receive this wisdom because I'm going to take this insight into my own life today like this, and then write whatever comes to mind. It is a powerful, powerful practice to write from quotes from literature. I have had live notebooking sessions inside my Patreon community where we have done this. And it's amazing the writing that just comes out when it is sparked from a quote that appeals to us in some way. It bridges our love of reading to our love of writing and notebooking. And then that funnels into our day, making our day feel better too. So I hope in this episode, I have convinced you to give quote collecting a try. I want you to lift the lines from the literature that you're reading, collect them in a notebook, and use them in your actual life. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell me your favorite quotes. I have my own quote notebook and it is quite full, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for more. So tell me your quotes. And there's two reasons behind it. One, I want to know what quotes are jumping out to all of you. But number two, if that quote also jumps out at me and I know the book that it came from, I just got to add another book to my personal TBR. So I would love if you would take a quote that you love, make sure you're sharing the title and the author as well, and share it with me. You can send me an email at stephanieaffinito@gmail.com. You can go to alitlife.com and you can pop your quotes in the comments for this episode. You can go to social media, find the post for this episode, and leave a comment there. You can direct message me on Instagram or Facebook. I am at Affinito Lit. Again, you've got that audio button where you can just pick it up and you can read your favorite quote to me. But here's what I'd really, really love. If you could make a social media post and post it and tag me, I will enter you into a little giveaway for a small notebook that I think is perfect for starting a quote collection. This way, you are putting your quotes out into the world and I'm finding them, and hopefully you'll get a little notebook bling along the way. So thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Get Literate podcast. I hope you've got your notebooks ready, your highlighters ready, and you're ready to explore how lifting the lines from literature can help make our actual life feel really, really good. Thanks so much, everyone. I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing life, like bonus podcast episodes, book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking inspiration, live events, giveaways, and more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all of the previous content too. Learn more at getliterate.co. And one more thing, if you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow, and it builds our bookish and notebookish community too. Thanks for listening.